Good evening, and we'd like to extend a warm welcome to all to this webinar titled Social Media and Surgical Research. This webinar is sponsored by the SSAT Research Committee, and we'd like to thank the SSAT for their continued support. We have an exciting lineup of nationally recognized experts who will speak on various aspects of this topic. I'm Oliver Ng from the University of California, Irvine, and will be co-moderating with my colleague, Dr. Margot Mustaine from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Each of the speakers will be providing a talk, and there will be opportunities for Q&A after each talk as well as at the end of the webinar. Please additionally feel free to utilize the chat feature to ask questions. Without further ado, our speakers today are Dr. Syed Ahmad, who is Chief of Surgical Oncology and Vice Chair for Faculty Development at the University of Cincinnati, Dr. Yalini Vigneswaran, who is Surgical Director of the Education Institute and Director of Esophageal Diseases at the University of Chicago, and Dr. Neeraj Gusani, who is Chief of Surgical Oncology at Baptist MD Anderson Cancer Center. Dr. Ahmad will give the first talk, and the title of his talk is Strategies in Managing Misinformation in Social Media. Dr. Ahmad.
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank the SSAT for inviting me to give this talk, and I want to thank Oliver and Margot for moderating this session. I'm looking forward to having a lively discussion and learning from the panelists as well as the moderators. So as Oliver mentioned, the talk of my talk is really managing strategies for managing misinformation in social media. And this is obviously a very important topic that has gotten a lot of press recently based on COVID pandemic and other social issues that have arisen the last 3 or 4 years. So as a way of introduction, first and foremost, I'll try to see if I can hide that. I want to give a little introduction in terms of the impact of social media and where we are today. We know that social media in healthcare has really emerged as a powerful and transformative force. It's revolutionized how we as doctors, professionals communicate to one another, how hospitals communicate to patients. It's estimated based on research done by the market.us that in 2022, 7.1 billion people use social media. And it's estimated that by the year 2032, this will increase by almost 23%. We know that 80% of the internet users are aged 18 to 50, and they've reported seeking health information on the internet. 80% of healthcare professionals use social media. 40% of patients claim that social media influences decision-making. 60% of physicians state that social media influences the quality of care that they deliver to their patients. And Twitter, now known as X, has become the most prominent platform for health-related discussions with over 1 million tweets posted daily. With regards to healthcare organizations, the most popular platform is Facebook, with 95% of hospitals having active presence. X is the most widely used platform, with over 50% of physicians using this platform. Instagram is also very popular, with 4.5 billion likes per month on healthcare topics. 70% of healthcare industry use LinkedIn, and 70% of healthcare consumers trust information shared by their peers on social media. Again, with regard to healthcare marketing, the predominant platform is Facebook, followed by YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and then LinkedIn. Again, X is probably the most popular platform for discussions regarding healthcare topics. The majority of doctors are active on X. Healthcare institutions provide a post of an average of 1.7 tweets per day. And you can see on the graphs on the right that the number of tweets related to healthcare increased from 500,000 in 2018 to over 4.8 million in the year 2022. And this continues to increase year by year. Now, there are many advantages of social media. And this is a paper that one of my residents published a few years ago. And this lists some of the advantages of social media. Number one, it increases the impact of clinical and basic science discovery to a broader audience. More people can benefit from the data that's put out there, the results of clinical trials. It gives access to leaders in the field. It allows for peer review. So when data is presented on social media, more people are exposed to it and are able to comment and constructively critique the data. It allows for interpretation of the data. A lot of times, data needs to be put in context, and when it's put on social media and people comment about the context of the results, the people understand the results better. There are a lot of people around the world who are unable to gain access to manuscripts, and social media allows people to have access to manuscript sharing. It disseminates new results. So this tweet on the right is something that I tweeted at the ASCO GI meeting a few years ago as Dr. Roshan Shroff presented the results of the SWOG 1815 trial looking at a combination of triplet therapy for cholangiocarcinoma. And so just as it was being presented, people were exposed to the results worldwide. So it's real-time sharing of results. It allows for collaboration. I've certainly have developed research and mentorship collaboration through social media. And again, it allows younger physicians to network with regards to career development. But there are also disadvantages of social media. For example, information sharing can be done without peer review process. So a lot of times, data that's put out there, if it's not commented on, if there's not peer review that's been associated with it, people may take the data as true, even though the information not may be false. We know that the credibility of the user or poster remains unclear. There's no disclosure with regards to conflict of interest. And sometimes interpretation results need to have the appropriate background to understand the significance. People can post results anonymously, and misinformation that's posted is subject to crowdsourcing. So if something is put on social media that's not accurate, it can be retweeted and reshared, and the misinformation can be exposed to a broader audience. Now, there are really three types of information out there. There's misinformation, which is what we're talking about today. And misinformation really are false information that's unintentionally spread. That's different than disinformation, where the information is not true, but it's intentionally spread. And then there's malinformation, which is true information that's intentionally spread to cause harm. So both disinformation and malinformation are spread to cause harm, whereas misinformation is spread without the intention of causing harm. Now, what are the drivers of misinformation? So really, it all depends on the source, the message, and the receiver. So the source is the person or the organization sending the message. So if the source is credible, for example, a social media influencer, a media personality, people tend to believe the information that's being posted. Um, when the source is credible, the ambiguity of the source gets ignored. So the data, even though it may not be accurate, is accepted without people understanding the ambiguous nature of where the data is originating from. We also know the message has an impact. For example, if a message is associated with graphics, with pictures, with charts, people tend to digest that information much better. If the information is in a story form, people tend to believe that a lot more. So these types of information usually target emotions, target panic, target fears, and these are the things that are spread when someone is able to accept this message. And the receiver is also a driver of misinformation. We know that certain demographics based on education, age, geography are more prone to misinformation. Studies have been shown that in terms of the US conservative viewpoints, people with conservative viewpoints are more prone to accepting misinformation without really challenging the results, and they're more prone to conspiracy theories. We know that the public trust of medical professionals has gone down. In 1966, when surveyed, public had a trust of 73%. This is going down to 40% in the year 2024. And there's lots of factors that have led to the decline of trust, including overwhelming volume of information coming from many sources. Sometimes this information can be conflicting. There's an increased social and political divide. In general, the public has poor health literacy and they're unable to digest information that's being given to them. Oftentimes, they're getting exposed to conflicting messages and medical misinformation. And a lot of this is actually coming from doctors. We know that medical misinformation is oftentimes produced from medical professionals. And good examples of this is, for example, the Great Barrington Declaration that was published by reputable doctors from reputable institutions during the COVID, questioning the lockdown, questioning the need for masks. There are many, many posts from doctors during COVID questioning the need for masks that got hundreds and thousands of views and likes. And a lot of times this medical misinformation is spread on purpose for social rewards that is related to likes, retweets, having increased followers, or gaining a national recognition. if you look at this study, which looked at systematically 69 studies, the most prevalent topics where medical misinformation was spread was based on these bullet points here: diet, vaccines, drugs, non-communicable disease, eating disorders, and medical treatments. And if you look at all medically related social media posts based on the study, 20 to 87% had misinformation. This is just one example of one study looking at urologic conditions. You can see based on these four topics that these authors looked at, including urologic oncology, that articles shared about urologic oncology on Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and Reddit were inaccurate. And many YouTube videos about specific topics were poor quality and did not mention complications. Looking at things like sexual medicine in infertility, many of the YouTube videos about premature ejaculation were fair to poor quality, and YouTube videos about infertility with successful outcome received more viewer engagement and really were associated with unrealistic expectations. So how do we combat and minimize misinformation? First and foremost is we need to start at the very beginning and really educate our medical students about how to responsibly share social media posts. They need to be able to discern relevant findings while understanding bias and conflict of interest and understanding how their communication impacts the public. And there are several schools that already have curriculums that teach medical students about responsibility in social media, including the University of Chicago and the University of Minnesota. We also need to look at our surgical societies like the SSAT and academic bodies to develop enforceable guidelines on social media. We know that some societies, like Society for Vascular Surgeons, have already done so. And we need to work with social media platforms for fact checking, and the AMA is doing this currently. We also need to rely on our journal editorials, working with the public groups, fact checking, and really publishing summary review and data of evidence so that if medical misinformation is spread, we can then rely on the journals to really publish and present real data. We need to carefully disseminate information, not exaggerate or misrepresent data. Data presented as presented in an accurate, unbiased, and in balanced form. And there are guidelines that tell us how to present data, including guidelines from the Academy of Medical Sciences. And there's actually an algorithm of how to present data on Facebook and Twitter that was published in the nursing journal, Nursing Research, disseminating research information through Facebook and Twitter. We need to have expert fact checking, real-time checking of posts, an open peer review process that come from credible sources that really communicate data where we're presenting real data and we're not engaging in debate. When we engage in debate, that our message gets diluted. And then we need to have social media campaigns that collaborate with social media influencers and key opinion leaders that leverage their influence on spreading true information and combating misinformation. We need to be engaged with the public, identify public health leaders to communicate to the public. We need to have open dialogues. We need to be approachable. And we know that the AMA has a forum called Ask Me Anything on Reddit that allows people to ask questions and engage with medical professionals. We have to have a culture of fact checking where we help the public develop greater health literacy. And this can be done through web-based educational interventions, tailor interventions for difficult to reach populations. So we need to understand like how some populations that are more prone to misinformation digest and get their information, and we need to tailor our delivery to them. And we need to be advocates as physicians. A lot of times when I talk to junior doctors, they're always afraid to engage on social media about controversial topics because they think somehow it's going to sabotage their career. But we need to understand that correcting misinformation is probably the most successful when it comes from a trusted source like a doctor. And the threat of misinformation demands a proactive and collaborative response from us as physicians. There's also this concept of pre-bunking when we know that there's data that can be twisted or delivered in a way to mislead the public. One way to combat that is actually deliver the true information before they're exposed to the misinformation. And that's called pre-bunking. Um, and really, we need to do more research into the psychology of how misinformation is accepted by the public. And we need to develop paradigms that deliver messages that allow them to not be exposed to accepting false data, like the pre-bunking that I talked about. There are many algorithms out there. This is just one that can detect false information. This was a computer algorithm that utilized a mathematical model that was able to accurately catch 92% of inaccuracies in social media posts. And we need to demand that these social media platforms start utilizing these algorithms and really flagging posts that carry misinformation. I know there more recently with Meta and everything, there's been a lot of talk about misinformation not being checked. And then there's also this thing called nudge intervention. We know that if people have the ability to post things with only a few options for reactions, people are more likely to post misinformation. But if you take a post and have more options for the receiver to comment on, like, dislike, not trust, people are less likely to post misinformation. So there are ways to decrease this working with the social media platforms. But overall, and this is my last slide, strategies against misinformation really is based on these five buckets. It's managing, it's message-based, source-based, network-based, policy-based, and education-based approaches. And you can see all the different algorithms that exist within these different categories. It's really a multi-pronged approach in terms of education, working with the public, social media influencers, engaging with academic bodies and journals to educate the public about the true data and make them more savvy in terms of not being prone to misinformation. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for a very interesting talk. I know that we have time for one question right now from the audience before we go on to the next talk, and then again, we will wrap back up with another Q&A at the end of the session. There was a comment, love the misinformation, disinformation, malinformation slide. Great way to break it down. Please share. And we can obviously share that information. I guess while we're waiting, and we can also circle back, like I said, to questions at the end. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but for either trainees or junior faculty that are a little bit hesitant to speak out about misinformation early on in the career, what advice do you have to help them, I guess, gain that experience or get over that hurdle? And then do you think that that approach or your response to that would change over time or evolve during their career?
Yep, it's a great and important question. So first of all, our job is not to debate. Our job is to present accurate data. And oftentimes, for example, like when I was seeing patients during COVID, I'd ask them simply, have you gotten your vaccine? And they would go into their viewpoints on what they thought about the vaccine. And I'm like, you're obviously responsible adult. You can make your decision. I'm just going to tell you the data I know, and I present the data. So that's what the approach I would use is just not to get engaged in debate, not to make it political, but just to present the data as you know it, and then let them decide. I think that's step number one.
Thank you so much. That is very practical advice. I guess, like I said, we'll circle back to more questions later on when we get to more discussion. Our next talk is going to be use of social media in establishing scientific collaborations.
So I just want to thank you for the invitation to talk today. I have no relevant disclosure. So a little bit about me, because today what I'm going to talk about is about my experience with social media and how it's helped me with my academic collaborations. And so it's going to be a little bit different than the other talks. A lot of what my academic interests are within surgical innovation. I am a minimally invasive surgeon in foregut surgery. And so that's where a lot of my work is. My only disclosure is I don't have a huge social media presence. And so, unlike some of our other speakers here who have massive followings on Twitter or X and other social media, I don't have a lot of experience with actually promoting myself and so on a lot of the social media platforms. But a lot of my following that grew was actually directly related to some of the collaborations that happened during some of my academic endeavors. And so, briefly, I'm going to tell you a story about one of my surgical innovations that have kind of really taken off through social media, and hope that you can learn from my experience. And I'm still learning as well. And so, we developed about 4 years ago a new surgical technique to fix large paraesophageal hernias. Essentially, I developed a technique with one of our plastic surgeons where we used plastic reconstructive techniques to harvest the posterior rectus sheath. To bring it up as a pedicled flap up onto the diaphragm and reconstruct these large diaphragmatic hernias that had otherwise had very high recurrence rates, right? So I won't go into the details of this too much, but just to give you some background, we first published on this now 3 years ago of our initial experience. Didn't really get a lot of attention. We did present it at some meetings. People did have some interest. I did have people reach out to me. However, it wasn't something that kind of caught a lot of attention nationally or internationally. It wasn't until we published in Annals of Surgery and they selected our paper to be promoted on social media. And so we put together a visual abstract and they tweeted this out. One thing that I didn't love about this is they tweeted out the paper before they had actually put the paper in press. And so that made it a little bit difficult to get the information out there about what we were doing. But it did get a lot of attention. You can see on this post, it got 35,000 views. Of course, I retweeted that on my own profile, and it had 23,000 engagements just from that tweet. But it was really the comments and the responses and the interaction engagement that I had with the viewers on Twitter that helped really grow this interest and grow collaboration across the world. And so I don't know if this whole video will play, but basically you can see there was a lot of views on this, but there was a lot of comments, and a lot of it was just like, oh, great job, blah, blah, blah. But there were some things that were more interactive, right? People asked questions, people asked for videos. So I posted videos, and these actually got a lot of engagement, right? Like Dr. Ahmad was talking about, visual things really get a lot of attention and traction. And so having these videos, 10,000 views on this video, I posted a few videos in this chain. It did stimulate discussion. It did stimulate engagement with people. And it wasn't just people nationally within, our network in the US. It engaged a lot of people internationally. And so it was kind of the beginning of how this kind of went a little viral. This was like my little moment on social media. I became the posterior rectus sheath girl or whatever. And so people started interacting, and it was engagement through comments. It was engagement through DMs. It was a lot of interactions through just this one post. Then we started getting collaboration from all over the world, right? So there were surgeons in India that were starting to adopt this. They started posting their videos on Facebook. They, would tag me in some of these things. There'd be interaction about what was going on. We can talk a little bit about misinformation on social media. There's also some ethical responsibility, obviously, when you share these techniques and innovations on social media, because it's, that's a whole nother topic about dissemination and adoption of these techniques on social media. So, what I learned is I got a lot of interaction through this. The keys that I found through collaborating on social media is, one, be approachable, be kind. A lot of people will say negative things on social media. They'll try point out people's errors. This isn't a way to be collaborative. It's not a way to move forward in an effective way. So be kind. If someone has something that you might not agree with, you can still engage with them in a kind way. And I think that there's no other way about it. You got to be kind. You got to be approachable. People should be able to talk to you. And so for me, what that meant was being very transparent and being very honest with my research, right? This was a very innovative thing. I don't know what the long-term data was. I wasn't sure about the risks. I was very honest about, what I was doing with my patients, the conversations I was having with my patients, and my own expectations. Be available. So I think one thing that's really important is, if you're putting your work out there, you have to be able to respond. You have to be responsive to the comments. You have to be, really seeing what's going on with how people are carrying your work forward on social media. One thing I learned was I think it's a default setting actually on X for messages to be only allowed by verified users or your followers. So you should make sure that your settings are set in a way that if people want to DM you, they can. And that was something that I learned, that some people were not actually able to engage with me privately because I had certain settings on my Twitter profile. And then it's really important to continue to highlight your existing collaborations, right? If you're already working with people, if you have people that are, that you're working with, highlight that. It shows that you are collaborative and that people will want to collaborate with you. Tag people. Hashtags is something probably we could have a whole conversation on. I think that we all feel like hashtags are phasing out. It's not. You still need to use hashtags. It can increase your engagement regardless. And then and then repeat, kind of rinse and repeat. You got to keep updating these things. You got to keep making sure that you're on the right groups, that you're in those rooms that these discussions are happening on in social media. And so a lot of this led to invitations all over the world. It did lead to a lot of collaborations. There would be people, there was a surgical trainee in England that saw this and talked to her faculty, and they invited me for their national meeting. There was a lot of things that happened through SSAT that also helped stimulate this, but the social media platform really did help this start to take off. And, this is only the beginning of the story. And for me, I hope this is an example that even me with a small amount of following, you can still do a lot with social media. You don't have to have a huge following. You don't have to have a huge social media presence to be able to engage interaction and collaboration. And especially as a young investigator where you may not be established, you may not have all of that network, outside or inside of social media, it's still an opportunity, and it really can get you out there around, internationally, worldwide, and allow for a lot of collaborations you may not have even thought of. The last thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is patient collaboration. And I don't think this is something we talk about enough. The patients are also on social media, and they're there, and they're going to be talking about what you're doing, and they can be advocates for what you're doing. They can be advocates for your research. They can be advocates for your academic interests as well. Reddit is a huge forum for patients. I don't know how many of you have heard patients talk about Reddit forums, but there's tons of Reddit forums about every medical field, every medical thing that's out there, Facebook groups. And so, I'm a foregut surgeon, so some of the places where I look for this is there's support groups for GERD, online achalasia, things like that. Patients are talking. Patients have found me through people talking on Facebook groups. This has been really interesting. The posterior rectus sheath stuff that I was talking about earlier has been on Reddit. There's patients talking about it. They're posting links to the journals, and they're talking about it. They're putting their own interpretation about the data in these Reddit forums. And so there are ways to engage with patients in these forums. You can, if you have research, you can, advertise that in these forums. You can put links about your research. It's a great way to recruit patients and let them know what unique things you're doing in your center. And so I think this is another important place that don't want to miss out on, that there is opportunity to engage with patients there. I was keeping this pretty short because I think the discussion will be really important, but I just wanted to say, we're living in a different era. So this is a picture of a Demeester and Skinner back in the day at University of Chicago. And, for them, like, academic collaboration happened a lot differently, right? We live in an era of social media. There's no way to get around it. This is actually opening a lot of doors for you in all sorts of ways. And I think it's a missed opportunity not to be able to use that in your research and your academic endeavors as well. So I'll stop there and happy to take a question now or later.
All right, thanks, Dr. Venuswaran, for that wonderful talk. I, like you, am probably I'm an advisor in social media, but it's amazing to see a prolific, just a progress from your discoveries just by a combination of obviously just the expertise that you have and also the social media amplification of it. So what's interesting is I think a challenge that we have in cancer is with clinical trial enrollment. This comes up all the time. And so, can we do better as surgeons and as physicians in utilizing social media to improve this aspect of care, more than mass emails or, things like that, and obviously you brought up a great point about patient support groups and, but are there things that we can do institutionally, perhaps to monitor social media to improve, or ways that we can maximize the usage to improve that aspect of cancer care?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. There's a lot, as has been discussed already, a lot in social media that probably needs better monitoring. And, there can be a lot of information out there. We've all been on, social media groups where people are giving clinical advice that a lot of us may not agree with, but no one's monitoring that. So I agree. I think that, there's probably a lot of opportunity, but it can be difficult, right? It's kind of the wild, wild west. So there's only so much we can do. I think, it would be a great opportunity for some of the societies to possibly think of ways to have recruitment portals on some of these social media avenues that patients are looking at, whether that's Reddit. I mean, Reddit, it seems to be the biggest thing right now for patients, but Reddit, Facebook, the support groups. I think, if you have it coming through some kind of societal organization where there's some regulatory agency, that might be a great way to start thinking about patient recruitment. Because I think you're right, right now, we're still kind of behind in how we recruit patients, and social media is an untapped area for patient recruitment for trials.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, we will now move on to our last speaker of the evening on use of social media for research dissemination.
All right. Can you guys see my slides?
We can.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the invitation, and to the moderators and Dr. Khan for setting up this great evening to discuss a topic that's near and dear to me. Certainly two wonderful talks and hard acts to follow. So I've already learned a lot, hoping that we can keep discussing this great topic to maybe explore some ideas about use of social media for research dissemination. So I don't think in 2025 you should start any talk without first asking AI maybe to do the talk for you or to figure out what's out there. So I did. My query was, tell me about the benefits of professional social media used for physicians, by physicians for research dissemination. This is a summary of what the AI said. This was Gemini. I've used others. Professional social media use offers many benefits, including rapid information sharing, wider reach to a diverse audience, real-time engagement with the medical community, potential for collaboration, increased awareness of new research findings, and the ability to facilitate public education and engagement, all while allowing for quicker access to scientific knowledge, blah, blah, blah. It also spouted out 10 links, only one or two hallucinations, and I actually had a great start for my talk. But I agree with all of these points to some degree, and we'll talk about them. But I went with a more traditional outline. So we'll talk a little bit about social media statistics, kind of the why. Dr. Ahmad nicely pointed out some of them, so I'll be able to go fast. We'll talk about social media platforms, or the how, what to do, once you choose that you want to use these platforms, social media strategies, the how to, and then we'll go back to AI just for a little bit at the end. Okay, so we all know, so I was giving social media talks before it was hot, and I'm dating myself, but I had to convince people that this wasn't just a fad, and this was something useful, and it wasn't, just pictures of your lunch and so on. Social media, we all know now, is here to stay. We see here the Pew Research Center does a great job with all kinds of data. These are US folks using or who have used YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, et cetera, down the line, and increasing utilization of all the platforms over time, and it's only going to get more as Dr. Ahmad showed. We know that professionals and specifically physicians are using social media. 2/3 of doctors use it for professional purposes. We also find that initially there was a great idea or thought that we would use physician-only forums like Doximity or Sermo and have a closed space. But we find that physicians are using all of the open forums and getting everything out there. That's sort of our general trend in the world, is that everything is open source and everybody has access to it and they can cull the data that they want. And so that level of transparency is important, though. You have to understand who is looking at what you're putting out there on social media, and it may be anyone and everyone. Interestingly, this paper talks about how they looked at the top 10 medical centers in US News and World Report, top 10 hospitals, and looked at physicians. And 70% of them have a social media presence, but 90% of them barely use it. And so posting 0 times per month on average. And so there's a reluctance maybe to engage as much, even though everybody's out there, everybody's reading, maybe people aren't engaging so much. What are some of the reasons why? Well, our group put out a paper a few years back talking about why some people don't use social media, and a lot of things, traditional communication methods, growing up in an era where communication was in the hallway, like Dr. Skinner did, concerns about personal privacy, concerns about HIPAA violations, lack of time, lack of value, unsure how to use it, and not clear kind of what it's good for. This paper talks about how some of the kind of groundbreaking things about social media. Social media, as we all have seen, and Dr. Vignesaran nicely pointed out, has a much greater reach than traditional publication methods. People can get to the papers. They're not behind firewalls as much. You can share things more openly. During COVID, we saw a vast increase in use of social media and disseminated communication means. Papers that were out there are hitting millions of followers on Twitter and now X almost instantaneously versus the slow sort of dissemination that comes from traditional journals. Journals that promote their research see an increase in subsequent citations, and so it's a good thing for our professional journals to be doing this. And social media has the potential to improve care because of the rapid dissemination. That old sort of talk about 17 years for information from a clinical trial to get into practice, that shouldn't be the case anymore. Now it's rapidly disseminated information. We all should be able to use it in close to real time, just as Dr. Ahmad is tweeting from from ASCO, telling us about the latest in cholangiocarcinoma. So we do know that the citations and mentions all track, and so statistically significant correlations between social media mentions and then eventual downloads and then eventual citations. And so you can see in real time what's going to happen in terms of your impact and get it out there quicker using social media. Which social media platforms to use. So the how, there's a lot of talk about this. Dr. Vignesaran reminded me that I need to add something about Reddit to my slide. There's a lot of different platforms out there. And yes, Reddit is actually a huge one because patients are out there kind of comparing notes and talking about it. But what have you, every one of these platforms has been used at various levels by physicians for professional things, including research dissemination, and there's different ways to use it, some of which we'll explore. I personally tend to use Twitter and now X, and we'll talk about how there is a potential migration to other platforms as Twitter gets politicized. Politics aside, though, it is still a great medium for getting things out there, and I like to see that the scientific commons on Twitter is still increasing, year by year. Professional networking sites are being used more and more by physicians, and like we talked about, instead of Doximity and Sermo, people are finding their way to using LinkedIn a lot more, and just like our business colleagues use LinkedIn, more and more physicians and professional societies are using it. People still use blogs and other ways to get out their message in longer form and get their message kind of the way they want to, but then they disseminate the information on the blog or podcast through their social media. So, you've seen the headlines. Are people leaving Twitter? Are they coming back to Twitter? Are they really leaving Twitter? Is there good information on TikTok, or is it all bad? What are the best platforms? This is all going to evolve, and we're going to see different platforms. And we may well see a balkanization of the platforms over time as people start using different things. But the idea is, if you choose to engage, you probably want to find more than one platform to get your message across in different formats and in different ways to different audiences. So definitely beyond the scope to go over too many details, but a little bit on the how-to. What can you do on social media to get your message out there? It used to be very simple. You'd put a link to your paper that's coming out. But as we've seen, we know that it's much more easy to engage if there's visual cues, pictures, videos, and so on. And so some of the how-to, Twitter used to be the format that I chose for these things. And a tweet used to be 140 characters. You couldn't really get much out there. Now it's 280. Now if you buy, special consideration on X, you can actually write as long as you want. But a tweetorial is a good way to kind of put your string messages together. Some people call it a thread or a tweetorial, a way to teach on Twitter or now X. So this is a tweetorial by one of my colleagues, Nick Zaorski, talking about a paper we put out about clinical trial accrual that we've already talked about in this forum tonight. So worked out nicely, but beautiful way to kind of in longer form go through why we wrote the paper, what we found, what were some of the other things that happened, in our discussion, and we can put it out there and people comment, as you say, you have real-time peer review, real-time discussion about these topics right in that forum or in different forums as well. And so a good way to get your message across. I am seeing more and more on LinkedIn. Just a couple days ago, this was a meta-analysis of lots of different institutional trials looking at the use of neoadjuvant therapy in pancreas cancer patients, left-sided pancreatic cancer. And so one of the authors wrote a very nice detailed post on LinkedIn talking about why they did the study, what the study showed, some of the collaborators and colleagues, linking to all of these other people so that they can all see this and then, amplify the message. And of course, linking to the paper, which, got my eyeball and got me looking at this paper, which I might not have otherwise seen in the Annals of Oncology. I don't, have that at the top of mind in my list of journals to scan. You guys all probably know about the visual abstract. Dr. Vigneeswaran talked about this. Put out a little less than 10 years ago now, sort of as a concept. Other people have done similar things before, but Andrew Ibrahim and others have talked about this as a visual representation of the main findings of a study. Basically to replace the wordy kind of text abstract and put it out there in a way that's easy to digest in very, in just a few seconds. So our own journal, Journal of Gastrointestinal Surgery, does this, a recent visual abstract from a paper that's actually in press in the Journal of Gastrointestinal Surgery, nicely laid out, talking about the paper itself, the methods, and then the comparison, and then the results. This is from, again, Andrew Ibrahim again, comparing, again, in the early days of the visual abstract, a text abstract on the left, the equivalent visual abstract on the right, and they did essentially a test of this and found that the number of impressions, the number of tweets, the number of shares, and the number of downloads goes up by leaps and bounds once you start using this format. Again, proven by Dr. Vigneswaran just a few minutes ago. Her sort of work went viral with a nice visual abstract talking about it, and then of course the videos to follow. Let's talk a little bit about alternative metrics. So we all used to look at citations of our work and our H-index and all of that stuff, and that's still very important. But we know that takes time, and it may not be the only metric. And we know that there are alternative metrics. The one is called alt metric, and there are others that talk about how these things, how our academic work is getting out there in the lay press, on blogs, how much it's tweeted, how much it's looked at on Facebook, and so on. And these are important metrics of dissemination of work, and it's important to pay attention to this, and a lot of places are using this. There's another sort of version of this called PlumX, and they give us a lot of information about how research work is being disseminated. I looked up Dr. Khan, our eminent head of the SSAT research committee, and his own Yale School of Medicine publishes, his papers, not just with citations, but with alt metrics as well. My own former institution, Penn State, did the same. They had the alt metrics, the scope of citations, the number of times the work has been cited, as well as this thing here, which is the PlumX diagram, talking about the different types of dissemination in the different forums. And so these things are here to stay, and they're an important thing to track and understand. So I always like to start with kind of, end with some guidelines. This is also from a paper from a while back from our group looking at sort of recommendations for appropriate social media use. We talked about some of the misinformation and some of the dangers that Dr. Ahmad talked about. It's really important to have sort of a personal policy, and then for institutions and journals and societies to have policies for professional social media use and to stay within those policies. Certainly when we're talking about patient information and patient stories, we have to be very careful. But anything we post, we have to be careful about the authenticity. People are looking to us to put out good information, and I think there's a great role for us to do this, but we have to maintain our professionalism all the time online. So I ended, of course, looking at AI again, thinking about how AI can help with research dissemination, not just me manually, making tweets and tweetorials and LinkedIn posts. What can AI do for me? And, we're all going to be using this more and more. But some of the things that came up from my query, how can AI be helpful in research dissemination, helpful in literature review and summaries, personalized clinical decision support, data visualization, knowledge sharing and communications. There are important communications. You only get out what you put in, so data quality is important. Clinical expertise can be hard to gauge, especially when an AI is doing it. And then ethical considerations sometimes are not picked up as well by the AI sort of technology, so we have to be careful to maintain that. Thank you very much, and happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much for another excellent discussion and overview of the use of social media for research dissemination. Go ahead and get started with a quick question here. There's obviously been a lot of evolution over the past decade of the use of social media for research. What do you foresee as being kind of, changes, or what's kind of the next thing that's coming down the pipeline as our efforts to communicate via social media for research purposes continue to evolve?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it be automated. We used to have social media committees and groups who would write the tweets for all the papers that are coming out from the journals and, have a rotation for tweeting them and putting them out and so on. And that's still important. It is nice to have the human touch, but it's just so much easier to sort of do it through AI and kind of get some of the information, the core stuff down there. You probably need an editor to look at it, but it's a lot easier to get things out there in a reasonable manner quickly using these tools and get the links right and and so on. And so I think we'll see that happening. And so the volume of stuff that's out there will increase exponentially, then becomes the question of how to cull it and how to get what's important out.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see the role that AI has to play kind of throughout all of this as we kind of continue to adapt and make changes. Well, we can also open up to more questions in the audience as well.
I have a question for the group and something that, I've thought about a little bit. The visual abstract was such a important and impactful part of research distribution and social media, but it's been quite some time since that has evolved. And I think, the initial impact that the visual abstract had may not carry true as much now because of the usage of it, but also sometimes I find that it can be misleading, right? It doesn't always really tell the full story of the paper, and it's almost like too quick of a shot to actually understand and interpret what's going on in the data and the paper. So, I think we will be moving forward in some way. Does anyone, have thoughts or ideas how that is? Right now, TikTok and kind of that short format kind of video presentation style seems to be what has been doing well with impressions and impact. How do we see that we'll move forward with the journals and research and distributing that information?
You're muted, Sai.
Sorry about that. I think different generations digest information differently. Once upon a time, when papers were published, they didn't have abstracts. And then someone came up with the concept of an abstract. And so then we started reading abstract to see whether we wanted to actually read the paper. And then I think for some social media posts, that's where that visual abstract came in, where for social media posts, you had the visual abstract to see whether you wanted to slow down and actually read that post and download the paper. And I think the newer generation actually responds even differently. So I'm a social media chair for a different journal, and one of the things that's really popular for that journal is paper in 60 seconds.
Yeah.
So we have videos summarizing the paper with graphics in 60 seconds, and that gets a lot of downloads. And so I think it's really how each personality trait and how each generation digest information. Like my generation, I used to take the journals, I used to cut them out of the journal and then read them on the airplane, the hard copy. And and then there was the next generation would download the PDF onto their iPad. And now it's like videos and other novel ways to disseminate the information, educate the audience.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, the visual abstracts are great, and you saw them, become fancier and multicolored, but they're still a very simplistic look at things. And some of the things we're publishing and talking about are complex things. So the keep it simple, sir approach can be a little too simplistic sometimes. So the video is great. Making a video and kind of getting all the important graphics in there quickly is hard to do for me. For my 17-year-old, it's really easy. She does it so quickly. She does it every day. And so, we're going to see that happening, right? A short video is so impactful. I agree that seeing, a paper in 60 seconds, maybe from the author, and hearing what their considerations were. That's why I still like the tutorials and the LinkedIn posts, because they allow you some of that detail. People don't have to read it all if they don't want to, but they can. And so that's sort of a nice in between for me. But we're going to see it in video as well. And some of the videos are going to be made by AI, and that'll be good and bad.
Just similarly, we talked about the use of videos for dissemination of new surgical techniques and things like that. What role do you see maybe society's playing in dissemination of some of these new techniques, or dissemination of videos, or curating videos to try to make sure that that I guess trainees and also people that are, attempting to learn new techniques have access to the best technique possible, or I guess vetting that.
Yeah, I think this is a big problem in our field right now. There is no one regulating how you innovate and what you do in the operating room. And this is, another area of interest of mine because, I've kind of seen a lot of how surgical adoption happens because, right, it's not an FDA approved device. It's not an FDA approved medication. So there's no need for you to go through certain regulatory processes to get it approved. There's a very much gray area of what is just surgical variation versus what is surgical innovation. And it's really, the surgeons, responsibility themselves to kind of decide when that line is crossing over to a true innovation and then ethically moving forward with it. So I think it is difficult because it's hard for these societies to take responsibility. I think there are certain forums that are better regulated than others. Obviously on social media we have a lot of these private groups that are run by societies on Facebook and things like that that have some, peer review and regulation of what's happening. But it is, an area of concern. And I think right now the onus really relies on the surgeon.
I think you're seeing the same in surgical education. I can find 1,000, liver resection videos on YouTube, but I won't know which ones are good. The journals or the textbooks kind of have a few proprietary videos, but they don't have that many. And, it doesn't always fit your needs for what you're doing, tomorrow in the operating room. And so, that balance between sort of a lot that's poorly regulated versus, very tightly regulated small amounts is what we have to figure out. And, it's easier now to just have thousands of videos out there. How do we figure out which is the right one that I need to look at?
But I'll push back a little bit and say it's not different than when we had textbooks. There were lots of different chapters we could read, but we would go to the reputable textbooks to read that particular chapter, to learn that particular topic. And it's not that different from videos now, where you're looking at videos from reputable surgeons with a certain reputation and history of publishing date, large series and datas, and it have known experiences. So I think looking at a video from someone with that kind of background versus someone you've never heard of, it's two different things, and you can gravitate towards the video coming from the center or the surgeon with a reputation.
Yeah,
So
I
I think,
think that
it's like what you said in your talk, it's open source, and people get to decide which open source information they're going to digest.
Yeah, it's almost like we have a peer review within within the society that kind of helps decide what is
Yeah,
reputable.
I agree. The parallels there, it's definitely true. The only issue is, there used to be 5 textbooks and you picked the one you wanted. There's 1,000 authors and 1,000 video content developers or
Yeah,
million or whatever it is. And so, picking out what you need or what you want is harder there.
that's true.
Well, I think we are nearing the end of the hour. So thank you so much for all the speakers for being here this evening and taking time to spend this hour with us. We really appreciate your time. Thank you all also to the participants that joined on the call as well. I'd also like to thank Oliver for co-moderating with me tonight, and then also for thank our committee and our committee chair, Dr. Khan, for supporting us through this webinar as well. And also thank this SSAT leadership for allowing us to have the webinar too. So again, thank you all for your participation. Great discussion, great conversation. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.